Welcome to our social contract theory recorded lecture. In this video, we'll focus on the prisoner's dilemma, Thomas Hobbes' argument for forming a social contract, his argument in favor of forming a social contract, and Jonathan Rawls' concept of the veil of ignorance. But first, we need a bit of a recap. Social contract theory is a normative ethical theory, arguing that actions are morally right just because they are permitted by rules that free, equal, and rational people would agree to live by, on the condition that others obey these rules as well. It gives us a procedure for determining the good rules people would accept as the basis of a cooperative life together. Social contract theory gives us a procedure for determining moral rules that does not derive these rules from some intrinsic moral goodness nor from human nature. It is sometimes referred to as contractarianism. Moral proceduralism is the view that adequate moral theories need to tell us the steps for distinguishing right from wrong. Proceduralist theories offer a method for justifying every moral rule. We do not begin by assuming that something, for example, slavery, is wrong, or that something, for example, generosity, is right. Rather, we follow the moral reasoning of some procedure to see that these things are, in fact, wrong or right. The procedure of social contract theory is to show the rational relationship between human nature and moral rules, even though, for social contract theory, morality is not innate in human nature. The prisoner's dilemma names a kind of situation in which everyone would be better off scaling back their individual pursuit of self-interest. Its significance is that it demonstrates the rational choice of agreeing to some personal restriction for some greater advantage. But it also demonstrates the rational choice of pursuing self-interest by breaking the agreement when an incentive or enforcement for others keeping their agreement is absent. To get clearer on this, let's look at a cartoon. The cartoon here illustrates the possible outcomes of the prisoner's dilemma. We see a matrix of outcomes for two prisoners, depending on whether they confess or remain silent. The image here calls them simply prisoner A and prisoner B, but let's call them Analu and Betty. I'm going to read the explanation of the prisoner's dilemma from our Schaefer-Landau reading. I've changed the prisoners' names and the numbers of years in the thought experiment to match this picture here. Follow along with the picture as I read. Imagine a scenario in which two thieves, call them Analu and Betty, are caught and sent to separate detention cells. Being rational, Analu and Betty previously made a deal with each other. If they get caught, they'll each keep silent to thwart the police and protect themselves. Now that they have been captured, the police tell each one the same thing. If you keep your promise to your partner by keeping quiet and she rats you out, then she'll be off the hook and you're looking at a 20-year sentence. If you break your word and snitch on her while she remains silent, you're home free while she'll spend the next 20 years in jail. But if you both keep quiet, you'll each get 1 year. But if you both confess, you'll each get 5. Suppose that both criminals know about the various outcomes and that both have only one concern at this point: to minimize their jail time. If they are both rational, what are they going to do? You might think that it's impossible to know the answer since you don't know enough about Analu or Betty, their bond with each other, their trustworthiness, and so on, to make an informed guess. But really, there is no doubt that each is going to confess. They are going to break their promise to each other, landing themselves a 5-year sentence apiece. That's a far cry from getting off scot-free, and 5 times what they'd get if they each kept quiet. The important point is that remaining silent is the cooperative strategy. Silence here means keeping one's word, honoring the terms of the deal. Confession is a betrayal, breaking one's promise, abandoning a partner. Analu and Betty are going to betray each other. That's certain. They'll do this because they know the odds, because they are self-interested, and because they are rational. Why will they confess? Because no matter what her accomplice does, each criminal will be better off by confessing. Consider Analu's choices. Suppose that Betty remains silent. Then, if Analu confesses, Analu is home free. If Analu keeps her mouth shut, Analu gets 1 year. So if Betty remains silent, Analu should still confess. That will minimize her jail time. That is what she most wants. So if Analu is rational, she will confess. Now suppose that Betty confesses. Then, if Analu confesses, Analu gets 5 years in jail. Silence will get her 20. So if Betty confesses, Analu should confess too. Thus, either way, Analu does excuse me. Thus, either way, Analu does best for herself by spilling the beans and breaking her promise to Betty. And of course, Betty is reasoning in the same way. So they are both going to confess and end up with 5 years in jail. The prisoner's dilemma isn't just some interesting thought experiment, it's real life. There are countless cases in which the rational pursuit of self interest will lead people to refuse to cooperate with one another, even though this leaves everyone much worse off. Pursuing self interest by breaking an agreement is distinctive or characteristic of the state of nature. We can make agreements with others in the state of nature, but without some way of securing that they will keep their agreements, it is rational for me to break mine. In other words, it will not be in your self interest to keep your side of an agreement if the others are not keeping theirs. It is in your interest to follow through only if all those who have agreed also follow through. If the two prisoners could really trust their agreement to keep silent, they could both get 1 year and presumably, maybe keep the stash of whatever they stole. And assuming they successfully hid that stash from the cops. And 1 year is significantly less than 20 or 5 years. But without someone or some organization compelling Betty and Analu to keep their word, it is rational to take the gamble for going free. This is why Hobbes and other contractarians identify the social contract as rational and beneficial, as long as the social contract includes a governing body in charge of enforcing the terms of the social contract. Agreeing to some personal restriction for some greater advantage is distinctive of the social contract of reaching a state of consent, either explicit or implied, to be governed by some body whose function it is to enforce the terms of the agreement, to enforce the terms of the social contract. What are the implications of the prisoner's dilemma? It illustrates how cooperation works or fails to work in the state of nature. So let's revisit the state of nature and then take a closer look at Hobbes's argument for moral cooperation. According to Hobbes and Schaeffer-Landau, the state of nature is a, quote, war of all against all, in which the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, end quote. And that's from page 199 of the Schaeffer-Landau reading. Human beings' only commandment is self-interest, survival, and self-promotion. In this state of nature, we owe nothing to each other. There is no natural or universal moral law, and no action is good in itself. In fact, all those moral values we usually recognize, justice, equity, mercy, the golden rule, right, are contrary to our nature. Hobbes thinks this is a bad condition to exist in because the Hobbesian state of nature, quoting again from Schaeffer-Landau, the Hobbesian state of nature is a prisoner's dilemma. By seeking to maximize self-interest, everyone is going to be worse off, end quote. When existing in the state of nature, our lives are organized around survival, and we must act entirely individually, since the only thing we can trust others to do is to act in their own self-interest, and this very likely will include doing us harm. And obviously, it won't very likely include doing us harm at every turn of every interaction with others, the point being that you have no ultimate security that others won't do you harm if it benefits them. In this state, we have no intellectual, scientific, medical, artistic, etc. progress. Right? These aspects are rationally desirable in that their development is in our self-interest. Right? They promote both increased survival rate and personal satisfaction. The development of intellectual, scientific, medical, artistic areas of our lives, however, cannot occur without cooperation between people. And so it cannot occur in the state of nature. While it is rational to pursue self interest, to do so uncooperatively is what leads to life being solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In this state of nature, educational and cultural progress cannot be made. Infrastructure like roads and bridges cannot be funded and maintained. People cannot be sure that their selves and their stuff are safe from others. We can emerge from the state of nature with rational cooperation. Rational cooperation characterized by two things. First, rational cooperation includes making rules for cooperating that actually benefit the contractors. The anticipated benefit promised by the rules acts as a strong incentive for contractors to actually follow them. Nonetheless, these agreed rules will still include the explicit requirement of following the rules and for punishing the transgression of the rules. Second, rational cooperation includes a person or group responsible for enforcing the rules. That is, a mechanism powerful enough to ensure that rules are obeyed. This mechanism is typically a government or some formal body with the authority to punish transgressors. With an authoritative person or government, contractors have a strong deterrent to breaking the terms of their social contract. And when everyone follows the social contract, all contractors benefit. It is through agreement and cooperation that society can develop and people can trust that others will not take their lives or their possessions. In social contract theory, morality just is this cooperation. Moral rules are those that rational, free, and equal contractors agree to follow because it is mutually beneficial for all that everyone follow these rules. So Hobbes's argument can be formulated then like this. Premise 1, it is rational to act in one's self-interest. Premise 2, cooperation is in your self-interest, demonstrated by the prisoner's dilemma, as well as our discussion about requiring cooperation to get roads and education off the ground. Therefore, the conclusion is that it is rational to cooperate. And morality emerges with this cooperation. When a social contract is agreed upon, the contractors are morally obligated to follow through. But the state of nature tells us that people will act against this agreement unless it is accomplished by unless it is accompanied by a system of incentive and deterrence.